we have limit as x approaches negative pi over 2 from the right of secant x. We know secant x is 1 over cosine, so we can rewrite this limit as x approaching negative pi over 2 from the right of 1 over cosine. Now let's see. Let's look at the unit circle, and let's look at where negative pi over 2 is. So that's going to be over here. We're looking at negative pi over 2 from the right. So the question is that going to be this direction, or is it going to be this direction? Here's how we know. If we look at a number line, we have negative pi over 2. From the right, it's going to be from this direction. And those are going to be numbers greater than negative pi over 2. So we can think of it, numbers that are bigger than negative pi over 2 could be like negative pi over 4, negative pi over 6, etc. And we know negative pi over 4, negative pi over 6 is going to be in quadrant 4. So this is a quadrant that we're looking at, so we can get rid of this right here. We don't care about that. Okay. That makes a difference because cosine here is going to be positive, and cosine over here was negative. So, okay. So we know our answer is going to be positive. Now what happens? Cosine of negative pi over 2, the x value here is 0. So cosine is 0 there. And since it's positive, so here it would be like root 2 over 2. This would be 1/2, etc. It's getting closer and closer to 0. So it's going to be a positive number over a really small positive number. And we know a positive over positive is going to be positive, and any number divided by a small number will just go to infinity. So my limit here is just positive infinity. Another way you could have done this is by graphing it. So you could have graphed cosine. So let's say you have cosine of x, and you know that, okay, you need to go a little more to negative pi over 2. So let's say this is 2 pi, this is pi over 2. So this would also be negative pi over 2. Negative pi, negative 3 pi over 2, etc. Okay, that's more than what we need to know. And when cosine is 0, that's where the asymptotes are going to be for secant. And we draw the opposite side, so it's going to be like this. Etc. And since we're looking at negative pi over 2 from the right, negative pi over 2, that's this asymptote over here. And from the right, we see that it's going to positive infinity. And so that's what our answer is. It's a lot harder to use a graph because there's a lot of trig graphs that you need to remember from pre-calc, and it's not always the most efficient. Okay. Next, let's look at cosecant. So we have theta approaching 0 from the left of 1 plus cosecant. I'm going to rewrite this as in terms of sine, because that's easier to look at. And I'm going to look at the unit circle. Okay, so I'm looking at 0 from the left. So to the left of 0 could be like negative 0.001, negative 0.00001, etc. So that's going to be, in this direction here, since you have a negative angle. And that means sine, in this case, sine in quadrant 4 is just negative. So I'm going to have 1 plus a positive number over a negative number. And let's see, sine, starts here, negative square root of 2 over 2, negative 1/2, and it just gets smaller and smaller, but it's still negative. So it's eventually going to go to 0, but it's going to get really small and then go to 0. So I have a positive number over a negative number, so that's going to be negative. And 1 over a small number, that's going to go to infinity. So I have 1 minus a really big number. That's obviously approaching, it's better to say approaching, not equal. So this is approaching negative infinity. So a small number minus a huge number will approach negative infinity. So this limit is negative infinity. And we can also graph this. So I won't go over all the details, but 1 plus sine, let's see, looks something like that. This is pi, 2 pi. So we're looking at 0 from the left. Okay, so we need to draw a little more. So let's see. At 0, so that would be previously negative 1. That would be negative pi over 2. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So we're approaching 0 from the left. Well, first, sorry, this is sine, so we need 1 over sine. So where this is going to be the midline is where the asymptote is going to happen. So my graph is going to be like this. Something like that. And I'm approaching, let's see, 0 from the left. So 0 from the left, that's going to be down here. And you see that's going down to negative infinity. So my limit is negative infinity. Okay. Now let's look at cotangent. Alright, so we have limit as theta approaches 0 from the right of 2 minus cotangent theta. Now cotangent, we're going to rewrite it as cosine over sine. Okay. And let's draw the unit circle to use as a reference. So I'm approaching 0 from the right. 0, let's use a different color. 0 is over here. From the right, will be coming down this direction. That's a positive angle. Let's see, cosine goes to 1, since this is the value 1 comma 0. So we'll have 2 minus 1. But now what happens to sine? Sine in the quadrant 1 is positive. So think of it like, okay, it's root 2 over 2, 1/2. And eventually, you see it's getting smaller and smaller, and it ends up at 0. So sine here is going to be positive, and it's going to be a very small number, eventually going to 0. So this is 2 minus a positive number, right? Because 1 is positive divided by positive is positive. And 1 over a small number will go towards infinity. So it'll go towards positive infinity. And then you'll have 2 minus a really big positive number that will also go to negative infinity. So the limit here should just be negative infinity. And we can see the graph. So this graph is a little tricky. So let's just write out the function 2 minus cotangent x. We know the asymptotes are going to be from at 0 and pi. And we're looking at 0 from the right. So let's keep that in mind. And in the middle is going to be, for cotangent, let's see, cotangent would have been 0, but because we have 2, we're going to move it up 2. And let's see, over here, 3 pi over 2, this would have been negative 1. You move it up 2 is positive 1. And let's see, this is pi over 4. Sorry, this is 3 pi over 4. This also, previously would have been 1, plus 2 is 3. Okay, so I think that's right. And then we could just connect it, something like that. And as you're going, let's see, that's not right. This is if it was 2 plus cotangent. So we need to go to the other direction. So this is tangent, and cotangent is the opposite direction. So negative cotangent, you flip it, so it kind of looks like tangent. So let's try this again. So we're going to go down here. Let's ignore that. We'll have 2 minus cotangent. So the asymptote was 0 and pi. And then pi over 2 in the middle. That would be here. No, that would be, let's see, pi over 2. So I think basically it looks something like this. We don't have to go through all the detail. And as you can see, if you're going 0 from the right, you're going down to negative infinity. So this thing would just go down to negative infinity.